Hey guys, today I'll show you an apocalyptic horror TV series named The Day After Vyzhit Posle, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama is set in a post-apocalyptic world where a biopharmaceutical company called Summit has been consistently advocating their vision to the world. They are committed to creating a world free of disease and pain. After decades of massive investment, Summit finally developed a gene virus called Clato. The researchers carefully placed it in a safe, ready for transportation to a prearranged clinical laboratory. Unexpectedly, en route, one of the accompanying personnel suddenly fell ill. He attempted to open a window for fresh air, but his colleague hastily tried to prevent him. The vehicle lost control and crashed into a subway ventilation shaft. Everyone inside fell unconscious, their fate unknown. The vial of virus rolled out of the vehicle and dropped right into the subway vent. The huge fan shattered the glass vial, and the virus spread instantly. The subway passengers were oblivious to the imminent danger. Only one woman's eyes turned blood red. Amid her daughter's cries, she collapsed. Then, another pedestrian fell on the roadside. The whole city was engulfed by ominous clouds. In just a day, many subway riders fell ill and were rushed to hospitals. The authorities labeled it as a terror attack, claiming that an unknown virus was released at the subway station. They were assessing whether to declare a state of emergency. But everyone didn't realize that the virus was spreading faster than imagined. Bodies were strewn everywhere in the city, and the city's security and medical systems were paralyzed. Many residents started fleeing the city as if the apocalypse had arrived. The nearby stationed army was dispatched on the streets to maintain order. In order to prevent further spread of the virus, the authorities limited citizens from going outside. If anyone showed the slightest abnormality, they had to stay home and were never allowed to wander around. The CEO of Summit, Glotov, was currently in his office, fuming. The virus sample that the company had spent a fortune to develop was suddenly gone. He couldn't explain this to the board of directors, and this incident dealt a significant blow to Moscow. Fortunately, they managed to clear their name by having a foreign terrorist organization take the blame, and they cut off communication networks to prevent public opinion from spreading. Next, their task was to quickly eliminate the virus. The assistant hastily opened the analysis report. The Clato virus they had initially developed was supposed to make women of childbearing age lose their fertility, but they did not expect that during the transmission process it would mutate. Upon infection, average males would die within a day. Luckily, the virus could only survive in the air for 24 hours. As long as residents were evacuated in time to prevent infection, the disaster would quickly pass. However, they were not aware that the virus would undergo a second mutation soon. Meanwhile, a group of young people woke up from unconsciousness to find themselves locked in a confined space. The doors around them were tightly closed, and their cell phones had no signal. The overhead lights were the only source of illumination, causing a sense of agitation. They continuously called out for help, but there was no response. Once they reluctantly accepted the reality of being trapped, the group began to introduce themselves to each other. They had never met before, with the only common point being that they had all been either knocked unconscious or drugged the night before, and they all found themselves lying in this place when they woke up. The young men refused to wait for death. They began to explore their surroundings and discovered that the place seemed to be an air raid shelter left over from World War II, with many old facilities around. There were many rooms leading to the main hall, but none of them led outside. Among them, an intern doctor named Irina concluded that they must have been kidnapped, but what the kidnappers wanted remained unknown. The man named Stas had a vivid imagination. He said that many reality shows focused on confining people in a closed space, then watching as they were killed one by one. Upon hearing this, a glassed man looked up and actually saw a video monitor on the ceiling. Everyone gasped and ran to the heavy iron door, crying out. No one wanted to become a plaything for a madman. When everyone's energy was nearly depleted, they began to speculate. Some guessed whether they would be freed if they paid a large ransom. Stas, still with his wild ideas, speculated whether the audience outside had started texting votes for the reality show contestants present. A bald man named Valera panicked as he listened. He didn't want to die here for no reason. He picked up a cart nearby and rushed towards the iron door, but the door did not budge. He then asked a heavyset man, Pasha, to sit on it to increase the weight. His companions laughed at him, saying that the door was built to withstand nuclear bombs. Valera's anger was ignited, and he challenged them to think of a way to escape. Fortunately, some did not engage in meaningless arguments. When Pasha was searching the room, he found a large cold storage room. Surprisingly, it stored a lot of food. This made him sigh a sigh of relief, because at least they wouldn't starve to death here. Only the glassed man wondered why the cold storage room was built so large. Perhaps it was designed to store bodies. Meanwhile, the ladies on the other side had also discovered a special room. It looked like a child had lived there, with various toys placed under the bed. There were even several group photos of doctors. Dr. Irina carefully examined the photos on the wall and concluded that this wasn't simply an air raid shelter. It seemed more like a secret lab. She noticed that each photo's background matched a room, except for one showing an operation. She wondered if there was a hidden chamber somewhere. After a thorough search, someone found a secretive hidden door behind a shelf. They moved the shelf and tried to push the door, but it didn't budge. Scat, a long-haired man, found a metal box with a switch on the wall. After gently pressing it, the hidden door opened a crack. Everyone squeezed their greasy body in to investigate. This was indeed the operating room from the photo. The operating table still had traces of blood, and various strange tools were available. The glassed man picked up a jar, and the substance inside looked like a brain. Dr. Irina took a closer look and determined it wasn't human. The glassed man continued his search and found a large amount of powder remaining on the table. Stas, who was in a playful mood, blew a gust of air at the man and then ran away laughing, taking care to close the door behind him. Everyone heard the glassed man crying out in distress from inside. After Irina pushed Stas away and opened the door, they found the glassed man hunched over, coughing up blood. Everyone was shocked, unable to understand how he fell into this situation. Everyone called for help towards the camera, but it was in vain. To no one's surprise, the poor glassed man died in an inexplicable way. Even with all her medical skills, Dr. Irina couldn't save him. Everyone finally acknowledged the harsh reality, and any last bit of hope was gone. Valera picked up an iron rod and smashed the camera. He didn't want his every move to be observed. Dr. Irina didn't believe that the glassed man could have died for no reason. He must have come into contact with some deadly substance. Stas felt a bit guilty. He would never tell everyone that the glassed man suddenly fell ill after he had blown a face full of powder at him. While Scat was going through some documents, he found something new. The doctors in the photos were all wearing uniforms with a familiar logo. A woman recognized it was the logo of Summit, the biopharmaceutical company. It turns out she had bought many of their anti-aging creams. It didn't surprise Dr. Irina, since Summit has one of the world's most powerful research capabilities. Scat interrupted everyone's praises. Summit wasn't as great as it seemed. He and a few hacker friends had once invaded Summit's server. The company not only sold biological weapons, but also tested banned drugs in some poor countries. The most tightly protected file was a project called Clayto. Unfortunately, he only saw the directory and didn't know the specific contents. Everyone began to speculate that they might be captured by Summit. However, the company's real intentions were still unclear. As everyone sat in the bunker, they were unaware of the drastic changes that had already taken place in Moscow. Due to the efforts of Summit, most of the city's inhabitants had already evacuated, leaving Moscow akin to a ghost town. Glotov stood looking out of the empty window, his eyes filled with resentment and anger. His assistant reminded him that it was time to leave, that the helicopter was waiting on the rooftop. Looking out the window with a cold gaze, the CEO was again asked about what to do with the young people in the bunker. He casually responded that the virus samples were gone. Let them fend for themselves. It turned out that these young people had indeed been captured and placed in the bunker with the intent of conducting experiments on them with the Clayto virus. Unexpectedly, they had managed to evade the initial wave of the virus attack. In an attempt to prevent the disaster from spreading to other cities, the soldiers had managed to seal off Moscow with a high-voltage electric grid. All major transport routes were heavily guarded to ensure no one could enter or leave. Elsewhere, a man named Max was speeding down the highway to Moscow. When questioned by the military, he claimed to be part of a civilian rescue organization, and he needed to go to Moscow to aid in the relief effort. The leading soldier told him that they didn't need any help anymore. Max quickly changed his story, saying he was actually on a mission to find his sister, but his pleas fell on deaf ears with the soldiers. Seeing they were about to draw their weapons, he reluctantly returned to his vehicle. After backing up several dozen meters, Max floored the accelerator and charged towards the checkpoint. The soldiers, caught off guard, could only fire their guns in place. Still, Max managed to breach the checkpoint. Not long after, he arrived at the apartment complex where his sister lived. Looking at his flat tires, he realized his car was beyond repair. What frustrated Max even more was finding his sister's apartment locked. It seemed she wasn't at home, but Max wasn't ready to give up. He decided to check her workplace, the hospital. However, the hospital was littered with corpses, with no sign of any living people. The bodies on the ground weren't just patients. Many medical staff had also fallen. Max was desperate to know what had happened here. Then, a stooped figure passed by. Max chased after him. It turned out the figure was the director of the hospital. The director quickly gestured for Max to keep his distance, but Max ignored his warning. He blurted out his sister's name. The director, however, responded with something unexpected. He said this was not a disease, and no medical treatment had any effect. That's why he had dismissed most of the staff earlier. Max wanted to ask more, but he saw the director clutch his head in agony. The director then pulled out a vial of medicine, claiming it could slow the spread of the virus. However, not long after he injected himself, he collapsed on the ground, powerless. Max was confused, wondering what kind of virus could destroy even the hospital like this. In the similarly beleaguered downtown police station, an old man seemed to hear a commotion. He started yelling for help, attracting the attention of a young man, his hands in handcuffs, who came staggering over. The old man panicked, insisted that he was not a bad person. He said he was a biology professor, and he implored the young man to find the cell key in the office desk. The young man scratched his head, turned around and left, only to return shortly with a bunch of keys. He had been brought in for questioning the previous day after causing a disturbance while drinking. When he woke up, he was surprised to find himself alone. The professor's face was filled with panic when the cell door was opened. He tried his cell phone, only to find there was still no signal. Even the landline was dead. Looking at the chaotic mess of the police station, the professor realized he was in big trouble now. Indeed, when the two of them left the police station, they saw several police cars parked on the side of the road. The young man searched, but couldn't find the key to his handcuffs. Corpses littered the streets, a sight reminiscent of the apocalypse. The young man's handcuffed hands made it difficult for him to move. Seeing a nearby bar, he thought its bottle opener might be used to pry open the cuffs. The professor, feeling hungry, followed him into the bar. The young man suggested that strong alcohol might prevent infection. The professor disagreed, asserting that alcohol was useless against this virus, which only remained active for 24 hours. There was no need to worry about getting infected now. As the young man worked on the handcuffs, he asked the professor how he knew all this. Surprisingly, the professor claimed that he was the one who invented the virus. The young man laughed, a look of disdain on his face. The professor didn't argue. He just picked up his drink, his mind flashing back to the events of the day before. While walking the streets, the professor had unexpectedly received a call from the CEO. The Clato virus was about to undergo clinical trials, and they needed the professor to oversee the process. The professor flatly refused. He had developed this virus purely for academic research. To his shock, Summit had pressured him into producing a sample, intending to use it on a massive scale and even conduct human experiments. When the professor learned of this, in a fit of rage, he declared he was leaving the research team. But the ruthless Glotov captured the professor's daughter as leverage, forcing him to compromise. The professor had planned to destroy the virus sample during transport, putting an end to Summit's plans. However, the virus accidentally fell into the subway's ventilation system, leading to an uncontrollable situation. The professor, who narrowly escaped a car accident, saw the bodies littering the streets and realized the enormity of the disaster he had caused. He wanted to report to the police and bring the real culprit to justice. But the police station was already in chaos and had no time for an old man's ramblings. Since he admitted to creating the virus, the police chief simply locked him up. So he spent the night in jail, escaping only with the help of the young man he had just met. Reflecting on the day's bizarre events, the despondent professor couldn't help but have a few more drinks. When he woke from his drunken stupor, he found that the young man had vanished. A pool of blood spread across the floor, leading into the kitchen. Curiosity piqued. The professor went in to investigate and found the young man lifeless on the floor, blood seeping from his ears and neck. The professor's pupils constricted sharply, but this was not a symptom of the virus infection. Elsewhere, trapped in a bunker and slated for human experimentation, the group of young people finally realized the gravity of the situation. Someone discovered mid-shower that the water had stopped. Scat, being cautious, didn't consider this a minor issue. He rushed to the cold storage to inspect, only to discover that the cooling systems had shut down. A sense of impending doom washed over him. There were only 15 bottles of purified water left in storage. Even rationing each person's water supply, they wouldn't survive 3 days in there. Pasha couldn't help but speculate if they had incurred the wrath of the puppeteers when they smashed the cameras. Everyone glared angrily at the instigator of their predicament. Scat interrupted the argument, stating he could fix a camera. As a computer hacker, dealing with these electronics was a cinch for him. After easily repairing one, Scat addressed the camera, saying that they won't cause any more destruction and begging them to restore the water supply. But he was answered by a sudden alarm. Everyone felt dizzy, their hands clutching their ears, but the noise showed no sign of abating. Scat hurried to the electrical box, attempting to cut the wires one by one. An impatient Valera snatched the pliers from Scat and started cutting randomly, finally silencing the grating alarm. After this onslaught, everyone's spirits plummeted. It was clear that the puppet masters didn't care if they lived or died. Scat then reached up to test the air vents, only to find all the vents had stopped working. This meant that it wouldn't be long before they would all suffocate in the bunker. When Valera was rummaging around the operating room, he discovered a toolbox. Combined with the chemical powders stored in the lab, he suddenly had the idea to make a bomb. If the amount was sufficient, he was confident that he could blow up the bunker's door. Dr. Irina voiced her concern, because the limited space here could mean they might get caught in the blast. Scat, however, thought it was a risk worth taking. In fact, they didn't necessarily need to blow up the door. If they could just destroy the hinges, the door might open on its own. With these thoughts, the group worked with Valera to concoct a tiny dose of explosives. He needed to test whether his formula was effective first. After lighting a match to act as a fuse, the small amount of explosive erupted with amazing power. The group couldn't help but smile in relief. The hope of escaping the bunker was within sight. Just then, intermittent calls came from the radio. Pasha quickly called everyone over. With Scat's tuning, they heard the content of the call clearly. The voice said that the city had been hit by a biological terror attack, and thousands of people were already dead. They were warned not to contact any infected person. Everyone thought it was a prank, but Scat didn't think so. He suspected that the bunker's supply system was malfunctioning, hence the water and air conditioning had stopped, and even the radio frequency was not blocked. No one doubted the reality of the virus disaster anymore. The curly-haired beauty, Nadia, couldn't help but exclaim that they were so lucky to be stuck here. The ponytailed Natasha felt her breath getting faster. Scat comforted her not to be too nervous. In fact, he knew that this was due to a lack of oxygen. Therefore, they still needed to find a way to escape here. Under Scott's urging, Valera finally made 2 large doses of explosives, placed on the upper and lower hinges of the door. After checking again, Valera lit the fuse on the explosives. Everyone was anxiously squatting in the corner waiting for the result. But just then, there were urgent knocks from outside the door. With the turning of the door lock, an injured soldier actually walked in. Valera quickly dismantled the fuse of the explosives and wanted to ask the soldier where he came from, but the soldier was too injured and lost consciousness. Irina prepared to perform an emergency rescue on the soldier. They were too eager to find out what was happening outside. Valera found a door card in the soldier's pocket. Undoubtedly, this was the key to open the door, but the legendary exit did not appear. Instead, there were even more rooms in the bunker. The fearless Valera picked up an iron rod and went in. The cautious Scat hesitated for a while, but eventually followed. What first greeted their eyes were the bodies of guards lying on the ground, their guns emptied of bullets. Clearly, a fierce battle had taken place. A few rooms nearby appeared to be living quarters with abundant supplies. However, all the staff had died horrifically on the spot. Valera had no interest in this. After swiping open another large door, he and Stas came to a huge corridor. After crossing it, the two finally emerged from the bunker, seeing daylight once again. But suddenly, a sharp cry rang out. Looking around, the surroundings were eerily quiet. After waiting for a while and seeing no signs of life, a strong feeling of unease welled up in both of them. They decided to return to the bunker and report to their companions about the situation outside. After discussing, they all agreed that they had to venture to the city, despite knowing about the virus. The supplies in the bunker were limited, and staying here would mean certain death. After burying the bodies of the glassed man and a few staff members, the exploration team set off for the city. Upon reaching the mountain road, they saw several crashed cars and many bodies lying on the ground. Any hope they had was shattered. It seemed the viral disaster mentioned on the radio was real. This was especially true when they climbed over the mountain and saw the entire ruined city. Everyone felt a chill to their bones. However, they didn't back down. They had to gather enough supplies. As they encountered more and more accidents along the way, they gradually accepted the reality of the city's downfall. Their pace quickened, and soon they reached the city center stadium. Once a bustling landmark, it was now deserted with not a single person in sight. Valera still held a glimmer of hope. He picked up a phone next to a body and tried calling the police, but the line was dead. Nadia was puzzled. Even if most residents evacuated, a city this size couldn't possibly only have them as survivors. As if to prove her point, when they finally reached a large shopping mall, a piercing shriek was heard again. Valera had heard this sound during the day as well. Something was off, and they planned to leave as soon as they gathered the supplies. However, the sight of a variety of food distracted them. Nothing was more joyful than free shopping in the apocalypse. After Irina filled a cart, she looked around and noticed a figure downstairs. She called out to no response. She decided to go down to check, but the figure had disappeared. Irina checked all the bathrooms, then suddenly a roll of toilet paper rolled out. At her most helpless moment, Valera came out with an innocent and shitty face. It was a false alarm, but Irina was sure she had seen a woman. Valera told Irina to join the group while he went to look elsewhere. As Valera reached the next floor, he saw a woman sprawled over a man, shaking her head. Valera approached the couple, but as the woman turned her head, her mouth was full of blood, scaring Valera into stepping back. He was about to leave when he saw more women emerging from the elevator and corridor. Their pupils were pitch black, their steps rigid. They didn't look like normal people at all. Realizing this, Valera turned and ran. On the other side, Irina and the others finished shopping and encountered another woman. She stood there, dazed. It took several shouts from Irina before the woman turned her head, revealing ink-black pupils. Irina and the others backed away, but the woman suddenly opened her mouth and a piercing scream shot into the sky. The chicken scream only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough to make Pasha's ears bleed. As they stood there, not knowing what to do, the dull sound of gunfire suddenly rang out. The black-eyed woman fell to the ground. It was Max, who had been searching for his sister. Valera also arrived to reunite with the group, shouting that zombies were coming and they had to run. They resisted the sonic attack while dodging the zombies. Max led everyone to the side door of the shopping mall where he had previously parked a car. Everyone climbed in, and they quickly drove toward the bunker. The people who had stayed in the bunker weren't idle either. Scat discovered a surveillance room when he was exploring. The video screen showed the room they had been in before. The staff who had lived here must have used it to monitor them, but for some reason, they had all died mysteriously. They would have to wait for the injured guard to wake up in order to get answers. At this moment, they heard hurried footsteps outside the door. It was Irina and the others returning. The girl, Marina, had scraped her leg while running, and Pasha helped her to the next room to rest. Everyone's tension had not yet eased. Max, who had saved everyone's lives, stepped forward to explain. All the infected people he had encountered were female, and they could emit sharp, shrieking noises. This was probably their way of calling their companions. Mitya couldn't help asking how Max knew so much. Max said he had been to many places in search of his sister, and naturally encountered many zombies. These zombies were all caused by the Clato virus from Summit. Everyone felt a chill. How were they going to survive in a city full of female zombies? Seeing this, Max swallowed the rest of what he was going to say. In fact, he knew more cruel truths. All this information came from the professor, the inventor of the virus. They had just met when they heard a piercing scream. They helped each other run into a nearby house to hide. There, the professor revealed everything he knew about the Clato virus to Max. But what puzzled him was that the Clato virus originally only made women infertile, but now the streets were full of bodies. It seemed that the virus had mutated when it spread on a large scale. The professor also discovered that the mutated virus would kill men within a few hours, but infected women would become sexy zombies with only the instinct to devour and the ability to emit high-frequency sound waves that could damage the eardrum. Max was still confused, but the professor was panicking. He had to destroy Summit's virus lab. If they were allowed to develop similar viruses, they would certainly use them on humanity at any cost. The professor knew the company's ambitions too well, but Max stood up without hesitation. He had come here only to find his sister. He didn't want to get involved in this senseless struggle. Watching Max's departing back, the professor collapsed to the ground in despair. Indeed, his concerns were not unfounded. At this time, the CEO of Summit, Glotov, arrived at a grand mansion nestled in the hills and by the water. Inside, members of Summit's board gathered. They were the true controllers of the company. Glotov was merely a puppet pushed to the forefront. He had come to apologize for his mistakes. The board members angrily reproached Glotov for destroying years of the company's hard work. Their initial intention in developing the Kleto virus was to render women infertile, thereby reducing the world's population to a manageable level. They didn't want their descendants to compete with over 6 billion people for resources and share the increasingly polluted air. But Glotov argued that the city had lost nearly half its population due to the virus. This was exactly what they aimed for, purifying society and creating a new world. And it happened much faster than expected. All the board members fell silent at his words. Glotov added that this city was just the beginning of their plan. He would find a way to fully control the mutated virus, and purifying the world would then only be a matter of time. If the board did not believe in him, he was ready to resign. After throwing down the pendant symbolizing the company's authority, he walked out of the hall, leaving the board members in thought. Glotov acted flustered when he returned to his residence. His proposal had been merely a means to preserve his wealth and status. He was unsure if the board would dare to adopt his plan. Just then, a servant walked in with a letter. When he opened it, he found the pendant symbolizing the company's authority. Glotov couldn't help but laugh, knowing that the board had agreed to his plan and his power and status were preserved. He ordered his deputy to reserve a helicopter back to Moscow, and accompanying him into the city would be a large armed force. Meanwhile, the young people hiding in the bunker were unaware that the CEO of Summit had returned. They were still contemplating their next steps. Staying in the bunker indefinitely was not an option, but they couldn't escape the city either. Everyone was plunged into despair. Marina, however, had other worries. Ever since they returned from the supermarket, she had been feeling dizzy and continuously vomiting. What's worse, her nose had started bleeding. Natasha couldn't help but speculate if she was infected with the virus. Hearing this, Marina almost broke down. Pasha, who had harbored greasy feelings for her, rushed over to comfort her, promising to stay by her side no matter what happened. At this time, Irina had just finished inspecting the injuries of the unconscious soldier. His severe blood loss meant that a blood transfusion would likely be the only way to save his life. The best course of action was to collect blood bags from a nearby hospital. The group fell silent at this suggestion, yet Irina felt that if it weren't for this soldier who had burst in, they would have long been trapped and dead in the bunker. Max stepped forward. He had previously visited a hospital not far from here, yet many were still worried about the potential encounters with terrifying zombies. But Natasha kept her knowledge of Marina's potential infection to herself. In the end, only 4 people volunteered for this mission, with Max leading the team as before. On the other side, a group of soldiers quietly infiltrated the underground tunnel, tasked with capturing the female zombies. After numerous twists and turns, they managed to glimpse some zombie figures. As they raced around a corner, they were met with a sonic attack from the zombies. The soldiers, in pain, pulled their triggers just in time to break free, but the zombies vanished without their sexy trace. They were forced to split up and search. Unexpectedly, the soldiers who stayed behind to look after the injured were once again surrounded by zombies. Although the capture mission was costly, they managed to bring back a female zombie. Glotov was excited as he looked at the new species. After preliminary research, the chief scientist concluded that they had only their attack and devour instincts left. They first used high-frequency screams to paralyze their enemies, then lethal bites to kill. Moreover, all mutants had a psychic connection, moving like a well-organized army. Glotov urged the researchers to do more research. He wanted to understand all the characteristics of the mutants. On the other hand, Irina and her team had arrived at the nearest hospital by car. Mitya walked straight in. Max ignored him and led the rest cautiously into the lobby, which was filled with the stench of decay. Irina wasted no time. She found out that the blood bank was on the 2nd floor, and they carefully made their way up. Suddenly, noises echoed in the silent corridor, indicating there were mutants lurking there. However, Irina knocked over a metal tray. Valera cursed under his breath and urged everyone to find the serum and leave. But before they could get far, they saw a shadow moving in the room next door. Everyone immediately got into a combat stance, only to find that it was Mitya who had found the serum ahead of them. Irina glared at him irritably. Transfusions weren't just about the blood bags, they also needed syringes and other equipment. Valera was dissatisfied with Mitya's previous departure without permission. Their argument escalated into a fight. Max came out to stop them, but it was too late. A nurse zombie was quietly approaching. Everyone took off running, only to bump into another zombie head-on. Max didn't hesitate to fire his gun, but the loud gunshot attracted even more zombies. Irina and the others ran for their lives. Just as the zombies were about to catch up, Valera managed to block the hospital's door until the car started. He then jumped into the car and escaped from the danger. When Irina and the others made it back to the bunker, they saw the door to the bunker was open, indicating that the intruders or even zombies might have broken in. Max and Valera took the lead and went in first, only to find an innocent-looking girl, Jan. Upon hearing that the outer door was left open, Jan quickly realized that shortly after Irina and the others had left, Marina had disappeared. Pasha, who was concerned about her, checked the surveillance and found out that Marina, worried about turning into a zombie after being infected, had heard on the radio that a nearby apartment was calling for survivors, claiming they had a way to remove the virus from the body. It was clear to them that Marina must have gone there. Without any hesitation, Pasha followed her. After hearing this, Irina suggested they go out and look for them, but Max objected. Leaving aside the fact that it was about to get dark, leaving the bunker was their personal choice. Just then, Natasha rushed out. The wounded soldier had suddenly woken up and was muttering something. It turned out that he was sent by Summit to kill everyone. Mitya couldn't help but burst into laughter, mocking Irina for risking her life for someone who wanted to kill her. Max believed they should still try to save him, as they might be able to get more information from him. Impulsive as ever, Mitya pulled out Max's gun, thinking it would be simple to get the information through torture, which he was good at. But when he opened the door to the side room, he saw that the sickbed was empty. Mitya looked around, only to have the wounded soldier suddenly jump out from behind him. In his shock, Mitya accidentally shot the man, causing everyone to freeze on the spot. Though the gunshot was unintentional, he insisted that the wounded man deserved to die. Max stood out from the crowd, rebuking Mitya's recklessness, saying it would get them all killed one day. Seeing that none of his companions spoke for him, Mitya was disappointed and decided to leave the bunker. He believed that the world had changed, and anyone who still followed the old rules of civilization and order wouldn't survive a week. So he walked out of the bunker alone, not even taking the supply package Max offered. On the other hand, Marina had already arrived at the survivor gathering place mentioned in the radio broadcast. To her surprise, there was not a soul in sight, and the place was in a mess. Just when she was confused, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Marina was so scared that she hid behind a table, but she soon was surprised to see the one who came was Pasha. Pasha pushed away the emotional Marina, suggesting they first find the broadcaster who sent the message. The apartment didn't look big, but its internal structure was complex. Eventually, the two found the broadcaster in a recording studio, already lifeless. There was also a mutated woman in front of them. Obviously, they had killed each other. Marina sat down on the ground, powerless. She came here to cure her infection, but her hope was extinguished again. Pasha quickly ran over to comfort her, using words but not muscles, saying that her frequent vomiting and fever might not necessarily be due to infection. Hearing this, Marina seemed to think of something. She ran to the pharmacy next door. When she came out, she looked much more relaxed. It turned out that she had just tested herself and she was pregnant. Pasha held back from asking who the father was. Inside the lab at Summit's headquarters, Glotov hustled over again to inquire about the progress of the research. The chief scientist informed him that the original Clato virus would selectively affect hosts, only stimulating the instinct to conceive in females with excellent genes. Ordinary women, on the other hand, would not be able to reproduce. The mutated virus, however, was not stimulating lust, but an urge to kill. Glotov didn't care about this. He only wanted to know how to control the mutants who could act in unison. The scientist didn't disappoint him. During each ultrasound check, the subjects felt varying degrees of discomfort, showing that pain was indeed the best means of control. At this moment, Glotov's right-hand man delivered the latest instructions from the board of directors. Without even looking, Glotov ripped them up. If he could control all the mutants in the city, he would never have to take orders from anyone again. He immediately gave new instructions to his deputy: protect the mutants in the city and eliminate all survivors. That day, the group hiding in the bunker went out again in search of supplies. They found that the damaged vehicles on the roadside had quite a few valuable items. Jan walked into a guard room, only to find a lurking mutant hiding inside. Having never been out before, she had no idea what to do. Luckily, Valera appeared in the nick of time, knocking out the mutant. When he asked if Jan had been bitten, she shook her head, her hand shrinking back. When everyone returned to the bunker and saw the abundant food they had brought back, they began to feel that the apocalypse wasn't so bad. Max watched coldly, silently leaving the bunker, only to find Irina following him. It turned out both hadn't forgotten Mitya's parting words, that they'd be doomed if they kept indulging in the bunker during the apocalypse. Max decided to continue searching for his sister, so Irina decided to join him on his adventure. Max was pleased with her companion. He was also impressed by this decisive girl, so he took her in his car and drove towards his sister's boyfriend's home, the only place he hadn't searched yet. But when he found the door unlocked, he had a bad feeling. As expected, his sister's boyfriend was dead in the living room, with clear bite marks on his neck, likely from a mutant. Max picked up the computer next to the body, which contained many recorded videos. It turned out his sister was indeed living here when the virus broke out. The boyfriend was always worried. Initially, they planned to leave by car, but because Max's sister was suspected of being infected, they were forced to stay. He could only administer antivirus injections to his girlfriend at regular intervals, but her condition only worsened, and 3 days later, the poor girl fully turned. Max couldn't bear to watch anymore. Irina found many antiviral drugs in the bedroom, but as soon as she walked out, the transformed sister appeared. Irina was so scared that she pressed herself against the wall, unable to move. Max, with tears in his eyes, raised his gun. As his sister was about to pounce on Irina, he pulled the trigger. Max closed his eyes in sorrow. His sister was his only family in the world, and he had killed her. His anguished howl echoed through the sky. After venting his anger, Max blamed everything on Summit, swearing that he would make them pay. Just as the two of them were making grand plans, their car ran out of gas. As far as they could see, there were infected roamers. They had no choice but to get out of the car and sneak into a secluded path. After a big detour, they arrived at a nearby street, only to encounter 3 patrolling soldiers. Overjoyed, Max and Irina ran up for help. But without even a question, the soldiers pulled their triggers. On the other side, Pasha planned to catch a Ferrari horse for his sweetheart to ride. Marina followed leisurely, only to see a corpse lying ahead. As she stood there dumbfounded, a zombie appeared out of nowhere behind her. Marina retreated in fear, but suddenly the zombie inexplicably fell. The next moment, she was stunned by a thrown potion. When Marina woke up, she found herself locked in a closed room, captured by men sent by Summit. The company was incredibly inhumane, locking Marina in a lab where the zombies were. Glotov wanted to see how a zombie would react to a woman. As expected, the zombie still had a strong intent to attack. But when the scientists released a low-intensity ultrasonic wave, the test subject was attracted to the source of the sound, and its desire to attack completely disappeared. When the scientists increased the sound intensity, the zombie showed obvious discomfort. Glotov was excited to see that and demanded to keep increasing the intensity of the sound. The zombie's body began to twitch violently until it finally collapsed. Glotov was pleased to see this could be a way to control the mutants. Therefore, he planned to install a large sound emitter to gather all the mutants wandering around using low-frequency signals. He couldn't wait to have this massive army. His deputy reminded him that it was only an initial confirmation that ultrasonic waves could affect the mutants, but the deeper effects were unknown. But Glotov was in no mood to listen to any advice. Instead, he urged the guards to speed up the clearing of survivors. Meanwhile, Max encountered several soldiers in military uniforms on the street, but they began firing immediately. Fortunately, Max was fast and managed to lose them by running fast through the streets. He then realized that the military was not there to rescue, but to eliminate the survivors. The two decided to return to the bunker and warn their companions not to go out. But little did they know, the bunker had already been occupied by a group of wicked bandits. They had actually discovered this place a few days ago. When Nadia happened to open the door, the bandits rushed in and easily subdued these unsuspecting young people. After confirming that no one was infected, the bandits finally took off their gas masks. After learning that this bunker had been guarded by the military and possibly attacked by mutants, the bandit leader decided that it was not a place to stay for long. He ordered to pack all the food and leave. The group were then shoved into a corner of the hall. Scat managed to extract some information from the blonde bandit. It turns out they were all professional pipeline workers before, so they were lucky to have escaped the initial virus outbreak when working underground. As long as they followed the underground tunnels, they still had hope of escaping the city. Innocent Jan suddenly asked why the military would blockade the city. The blonde bandit looked up and smirked, saying it's because they could do whatever they wanted. Valera saw that the bandit was up to no good and stood up to stop him, but he was knocked down by the butt of the bandit's gun. Faced with a gun barrel, they could only watch as John was taken into the next room. But at the next moment, the bandit leader quickly rushed in. He pulled out the blonde bandit who was trying to take advantage of the situation. He warned his teammate that no physical contact with any strange women. The The blonde bandit explained that she showed no signs of infection, but the bandit leader shot him dead without hesitation. After it was over, he didn't forget to warn others, because he knew young women are the only group that can carry the virus without dying, so they must stay away. The group quickly packed up their belongings, ready to leave. Given their limited bullets, the bandit leader planned to lock the door from the outside, trapping Scat and the others inside to die. However, Nadia shouted out, insisting on leaving with the bandits. She understood their needs. There were few healthy girls left in the city. Her companions tried to dissuade her, but Nadia believed that it was better to suffer with the bandits than to be trapped here to die. The bandit leader was about to take Nadia away when Valera suddenly stood up and told him to give them the tunnel map in exchange. Surprisingly, the bandit agreed. After leaving the map, they took the keycard and locked the door. Valera immediately went to the room to help Jan out. She seemed shocked. At this moment, Stas complained they were now trapped here, and what's the use of that damned map? But Valera told him that the map was their only chance to leave the city. As everyone argued, nobody noticed Jan standing in front of the mirror. She slowly rolled up her sleeve to reveal a gruesome bite mark. It seemed she had been bitten by a mutant earlier, but had kept it a secret. As everyone wondered how to escape the bunker, Max and Irina returned just in time. They shared the news of guards patrolling outside. Everyone fell silent again. They had to leave the city as soon as possible. The tunnel map Valera had obtained from the bandits finally came in handy. Traveling under the city was the safest method. Just then, there was a sound outside the door. Everyone held their breath behind the door. With a beep, a bespectacled man entered, only to be quickly subdued by Max and the others. His badge indicated he was an employee of Summit. Everyone was filled with resentment. The man quickly explained that it was Glotov's idea to trap them here. He was actually an assistant of the professor, who had different intentions. As it turned out, ever since the professor discovered Summit's ambitions, he began working on a cure for the Clato mutation virus to sabotage Glotov's plans. But now, the professor had left Summit and his experimental conditions were very limited. That's why he sent his assistant to this bunker to collect some virus data. After all, the Clato virus was secretly developed here. Even though they knew the truth, everyone still harbored a hatred for the professor. If it weren't for him, the city wouldn't have been infected. Irina, who had been eavesdropping at the door, had a complex expression. After everyone vented and left, she walked into the room alone, asking where the professor was. The bound, bespectacled man didn't answer. Instead, he told her that she looked a lot like the professor. Their companions outside the room were discussing how to deal with the bespectacled man. Suddenly, a woman's scream came from the room. It turned out that Yan, fearing she might turn into a zombie, was contemplating taking her own life. Only then did everyone realize that Yan had been infected. Valera, who cared deeply for her, told her that the professor was working on a cure for the virus. Seeing that Jan seemed a bit hesitant, he pulled her into his arms. After a tender reassurance, Jan finally gave up on her suicidal thoughts. However, when Valera walked into the room where the bespectacled man had been detained, he found the man had disappeared. It turned out that Irina had quietly let him go. Valera got furious. Irina only then realized that Jan had been infected. Fortunately, she had already learned the location of the professor's lab from the bespectacled man. Max added that if they followed the underground tunnels, they could surely reach the lab safely. At this point, everyone had to change their plans and temporarily abandon their idea of leaving the city. However, Stas felt there was no need to get involved in this mess and wanted to leave the city. His girlfriend Natasha also decided to separate from the group. Stas approached Max to share his thoughts. Max felt it made sense. If they managed to escape the city, they could seek help from the outside world to rescue everyone else. Early the next morning, all the group walked out of the bunker. After tearful goodbyes, Stas and Natasha headed to the parking lot, while the others went to the nearest tunnel entrance. Although it was somewhat narrow and dark, it was free of mutants and cleanup troops. All they had to do was keep moving according to the map. Still, their hearts were heavy because Yan's condition was deteriorating. Max suggested covering her smelly mouth to prevent a sudden zombie transformation and bites. Valera refused, insisting on taking the risk to stay with her. However, he got a scare that night when Jan suddenly stood up. Valera approached her, only to find that she was unconscious. No matter how much he tried to rouse her, it was in vain. When Irina administered an antivirus injection, Jan gradually regained consciousness, though she had no recollection of her previous actions. It was a clear sign that she was about to turn, which made Valera anxious. He even suggested changing their route to travel above ground, but Max firmly refused because of the lurking danger above. Stas, who was looking for a vehicle on the surface, unexpectedly found a ring on a corpse. He originally planned to give it to Natasha, but she was furious. She had chosen to be with Stas because she thought he was optimistic, but she didn't expect him to be so heartless. Watching Natasha walk away, Stas didn't chase after her to explain. Later, Stas encountered a fair-skinned zombie out in the wilderness. He locked the car door, hoping the car was zombie-proof. Unexpectedly, the zombie just stood there and didn't move. Natasha arrived in time. Without any hesitation, she shouted loudly, drawing the sexy zombie towards her. She was willing to risk her life to give her boyfriend a chance to escape. True to expectations, her boyfriend didn't disappoint her. He quickly fled in the opposite direction. Even the zombie couldn't tolerate such a cowardly act. Wearing high heels, it pursued him at a rapid pace. Stas cursed under his breath as he rammed straight into the high-voltage fence at the border, finally receiving the punishment he deserved. However, kind-hearted Natasha could not escape her fate of turning into a zombie. In contrast, although Jan was infected too, Valera remained steadfastly by her side. In an attempt to save time, he even suggested returning to the surface to shorten the journey. Max disagreed, and the two almost came to blows. Suddenly, Irina shouted out that they were running out of antivirus medication. The argument halted. Even though the injections couldn't completely eradicate the virus, they had been effective in slowing down the transformation process. This had been proven true with Max's sister. Irina had also found a fair amount of antivirus medication at her home, otherwise Jan would have long turned into a zombie. Valera, unaware of these details, was frustrated and began to question Irina why she deliberately let the professor's student go. Irina finally confessed that she was the professor's daughter. She had kept it a secret for fear that everyone would resent her due to her father's actions. As expected, everyone was shocked upon hearing this. But Max stepped in, saying Irina's actions had nothing to do with her father's. Besides, they needed to ask the professor for the cure. Valera, although angry, had to swallow his frustration for the sake of Jan. Having shared her long-held secret, Irina felt relieved and ran up to Max and thanked him. The group continued traversing the pitch-black underground tunnels. Before long, they arrived at an unfinished subway station. There lay several infected male bodies. Suddenly, one of them grabbed Irina's legs. He was not dead yet. In a panic, Max shot him dead. The noise, however, attracted zombies from nearby. The group could no longer afford to delay and ran rapidly towards the front of the tunnel. Scat tripped and got separated from the group at a crossroad. By the time he realized something was wrong, it was already too late. He could only climb to the surface through the only exit, only to find even more zombies there. Scat ran desperately with his head down, eventually cornered by several zombies. Just as the zombies were about to launch their sonic attack, a female motorcyclist wearing a helmet suddenly appeared. She pressed a button on her remote control, causing all the zombies to retreat to the corner. Scat thus miraculously escaped from the predicament. The group in the tunnel soon realized that Scat was missing. They immediately turned back and followed the traces he had left. When they emerged onto the surface and saw the body lying on the ground, a chill went down their spines. Max found a rooftop and went to look for signs of Scat in the vicinity. Meanwhile, Scat had already been taken to an abandoned dock by the motorcyclist. After expressing his sincere gratitude, he prepared to go back and reunite with his companions. Unexpectedly, she refused to let him leave and even pulled out a box of bullets for him to practice shooting. Seeing the two helmets on the seat, Scat knew her intentions. It turns out the motorcyclist had been planning to escape the city and had even mapped out her route, but she could only ride a motorcycle past the high-voltage fence if someone provided gunfire cover. Her previous boyfriend had died in an accident, so she was looking for another partner. Scat admired her courage and finally agreed to stay and practice shooting. Meanwhile, Max, who had gone out to look for Scat, returned to the rooftop in despair. Valera couldn't help but curse at the idiot for wasting their time. Jan spoke up, insisting that they couldn't easily give up on their comrade. They decided to wait for a night at their current location. Regardless of whether Scott appeared or not, they would have to continue on their journey to the lab the next day. Valera scolded Jan for always taking others into consideration, but Jan solemnly asked him to kill her if she would really turn into a zombie because she didn't want to become a monster and harm people. With a heavy heart, Valera agreed. On the other side, Summit's security suddenly broke into the bunker, but it was already empty. Just as they were about to leave, the assistant noticed that the food on the table was still hot. After a thorough search, they found the stranded Pasha in the bathroom. Now he was finally reunited with his beloved. Pasha had previously run off to help Marina chase the horse. When he returned, he found that she had disappeared. He waited at the spot for a day before returning to the bunker, hoping that Marina would come back and reunite with him. But due to a series of misfortunes, this pair were both captured by Summit. Marina started to worry about her companion's safety. After all, Summit initially planned to use them for virus experiments. They certainly wouldn't let them roam around freely. That night, Max and Irina kept vigil together. Suddenly, they heard Pasha's voice on the radio. He said that he and Marina had found a way out of the city and asked the other companions in the bunker to meet them by the fountain in Central Park. Valera instinctively thought this was a trap, but Max felt they should give it a try. After all, the meeting place was not far from the professor's lab. It could be an excellent opportunity to escape the city. With no other choice, everyone picked up their backpacks and moved on. They suddenly noticed that Jan was particularly sensitive to light. Everyone couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. It was a sign of impending zombification. Irina hurriedly injected her with the last tube of antiviral drug. Max felt they needed to find new medicine. Otherwise, Jan could turn into a zombie at any time. He decided to go alone to look for a pharmacy. Luckily, there was an ambulance not far from the tunnel entrance. Max quietly slipped in and found a good number of antiviral drugs. But when he was ready to leave after packing up, an alarm from a vehicle outside suddenly sounded. Looking out, there were 2 soldiers cleaning up survivors. Max quietly closed the back door of the ambulance and hoped they would leave soon. But he accidentally knocked over the medicine box, and the noise caught the attention of the soldiers. Max had no choice but to confront them head-on. He quickly packed up the drugs and hid behind the door. The moment the door opened, Max seized the opportunity to open fire, taking out the 2 soldiers without much trouble. After returning to the tunnel and reuniting with everyone, he urged them to leave quickly. He was sure that more soldiers would soon find their location. Not long after, the group successfully reached the park's exit. To guard against potential traps, Max asked everyone to wait there. If he didn't return within half an hour, they should leave and head to the lab. Irina was worried about Max going on a risky venture alone and followed him. Max appeared angry, but he was secretly pleased. After all, no one wants to be a true lone hero. The 2 quickly found the fountain in the park, but there was no sign of Pasha. Max was panicked, but Pasha finally showed up after a short while. Max and Irina hurriedly followed him. Valera, who was waiting in the tunnel, was getting anxious. Half an hour was almost up, and there was still no sign of Max returning. He asked Jan to stay put and decided to go check on the situation. But as soon as he left the tunnel entrance, he was surrounded by fully armed soldiers. Undoubtedly, the group had fallen into Summit's trap and were neatly locked in a transport truck. Pasha looked guilty, and Valera was tempted to strangle him then and there. But Irina understood that Summit had threatened Pasha using Marina's life to lure everyone into a trap. Just then, the door of the transport truck was opened, and Glotov came personally with Marina. Seeing Irina in the crowd, Glotov was extremely excited. He asked Irina to contact her father, the professor, as soon as possible. His mutant experiment was at a critical stage and needed the professor's intervention. Seeing Irina's determined refusal, Glotov was nonchalant. With so many hostages at hand, he wasn't afraid of Irina's resistance. He ordered his men to continue searching for other experimental subjects. Everyone was panicked, worried about what Summit would do to them. Suddenly, Jan shivered and fainted. She had never shown such symptoms before. Valera was almost going mad with worry when suddenly a series of gunshots came from outside the truck. Just as Jan woke up, they heard a piercing scream. They then realized that the guards outside were being attacked by zombies. Suddenly, the truck door was opened, and a soldier tried to climb in, but collapsed to the ground. As soon as the group jumped out of the vehicle, they encountered a dozen or so zombies. Everyone was terrified and didn't know what to do, but Jan seemed to sense something. These zombies seemed to be coming straight for her. She urged her companions to evacuate. Suddenly, a series of gunshots rang out. It turned out that Pasha had picked up one of the guards' weapons, but just as he took down one zombie, he found that the bullet was jammed. Seeing that all the zombies were gathering, Pasha shouted at his comrades to run, then detonated the dynamite in his hand. At the cost of his own life, he bought an opportunity for his companions to escape. Meanwhile, at Summit, Glotov issued an order to release ultrasonic waves. A super transmitter tower emitted a visible blue light. All the zombies on streets, as though summoned by an invisible force, began to mechanically move towards the direction of the transmitter tower. Max and his party slipped into a rather secluded manor, planning to rest there for the night. But when everyone had fallen asleep and snored like pigs, Jan suddenly opened her lifeless eyes and walked out of the manor alone. It turned out that she, like the zombies, had sensed the call of the ultrasonic waves. Valera was the first to notice Jan's disappearance. After waking everyone, he chased after her. When he got to the edge of the road, he saw countless zombies all marching in the same direction. After searching all the way, they finally spotted Jan mixed in with the zombie crowd. Valera immediately pulled her out. Such an outrageous action did not attract the attention of the other zombies, as their focus was all on the transmitter tower. Not far away, the zombified Nadia was slowly walking out. Behind her lay the long-lost Mitya. It's revealed that after Mitya had left the bunker alone, he began collecting resources everywhere. He happened to meet the bandits who had once broken into the bunker in a supermarket, including Nadia, who was with them. The two of them later split from the bandit crew, found an abandoned hotel, and started their happy life there. But Mitya didn't know that Nadia had been scratched by a zombie before. Within a couple of days, her body became weaker until she finally turned into a zombie. Mitya was going crazy. He wanted to end her sexy life with a single gunshot, but couldn't bring himself to do it, so he simply kissed her without using his tongue. Unexpectedly, this action seemed to stimulate the zombie's instinct to reproduce. It wasn't until the super transmitter was activated that the zombified Nadia finally left the hotel with a satisfied look on her face. Early the next morning, Max and others got on the road in a hurry. Jan was growing weaker, compelling them to hasten their pace. The professor's lab was not far off. In no time, they arrived at the basement of a huge building where they least expected to find that the professor's lab was completely boarded up. It didn't seem like anyone lived there. Just as they were sinking into despair, the professor emerged from the entrance. Irina immediately asked her father if the antidote had been developed, but the professor explained that a few key ingredients were missing from his antidote. His other assistant, Petya, was out gathering them. Valera was so furious that he felt like killing the professor, but he managed to suppress his rage. They moved Jan to an upstairs room, where she reminded Valera of their previous agreement. Valera was reduced to tears. How could he bear to kill the one he loved most? Meanwhile, the summit CEO, Glotov, received shocking news that all the test subjects exposed to the ultrasonic wave test had died. Autopsy revealed that the ultrasonics had caused a threefold increase in the zombies' internal hormones, leading to rapid bodily decay. This was an unforeseen outcome, and Glotov was plunged into despair. The army of zombies he had summoned using the super transmitter was on the brink of annihilation. The chief scientist suggested that pregnancy could stabilize the hormone level in the zombies and perhaps counteract the negative effects of the ultrasonics. However, this required further research and time. Glotov didn't say a word, but was determined to capture the professor for his lab. Coincidentally, the professor's assistant, Petya, had sneakily infiltrated the summit headquarters because the final ingredient for the antidote could only be found there. However, the omnipresent surveillance led to his inevitable capture. Upon recognizing Petya in the video feed, Glotov was ecstatic. The guards began to interrogate Petya, hoping to find out the professor's location, but Petya was resilient. He refused to reveal the professor's whereabouts and managed to grab the medicinal bag and made a run for it when the guards were off guard. On the other side, Skat's shooting skills improved remarkably with the help of the motorcyclist. They also experimented with several motorcycle jumps, with promising results. Seeing everything ready, the motorcyclist decided to start the operation the next day, attempting to break through the military's tight blockade. Skat, however, was full of hesitation, worried about his companions in the bunker. Just then, Petya, who had luckily escaped from Summit, suddenly appeared. He had previously encountered Scott practicing driving nearby and had come to ask for help, as he could hardly reach the lab safely on his own. Skat was very cautious. He searched through Petya's coat and indeed found a small locator. It was clear that Summit wanted to locate the professor through Petya. Otherwise, how could he have escaped from the Summit headquarters? It was apparent that the guards had let him escape on purpose. The trio quickly reached the basement on their Tesla motorcycle, only to find several zombies standing at the lab entrance, probably attracted by Jan. The motorcyclist once again pulled out the remote control, sending out ultrasonic waves that made the zombies scatter. The three people then walked safely into the lab. The professor didn't dare to delay and started preparing the antidote, while Skat quickly explained to his companions that the device to repel zombies was actually an ultrasonic dog repeller. As they were talking, the professor had already finished preparing the antidote. Just as Irina was about to grab a syringe, Jan, who was unconscious upstairs, suddenly opened her eyes. The toxin began to attack every inch of her veins. In no time, Jan's pupils turned completely black. She had actually turned into a zombie at this moment. Valera was filled with sorrow. He knew this day would eventually come, but when he really had to face it, he felt even breathing was a burden. The people downstairs suddenly heard a gunshot. By the time they ran upstairs, Jan had already fallen in a pool of blood. Valera hadn't forgotten his promise and had to end her life with his own hands. Just as everyone was immersed in grief, there was a sudden shout from outside the door, warning them not to try to resist. The professor had just locked a tube of antidote in the safe when several gas grenades flew in. Everyone in the room lost their ability to resist in an instant. Unexpectedly, they were unable to escape from the clutches of Summit after all. Petya couldn't believe it, thinking that he had removed the locator. Glotov smirked, mocking him for underestimating Summit's tracking capabilities. He then turned to the professor, demanding him to return with him to study the virus, or his daughter would be in danger. The professor shouted for him to stop and proposed to have a one-on-one talk with Glotov. The two went to the upstairs office. The professor pointed to Jan's body on the sofa, saying he had developed a new variant of the virus, which would turn people into more robust and aggressive zombies in less than 2 hours after infection. Glotov lit up. This was the perfect virus he was looking for. The professor pressed a few keys on the keyboard, saying he would pull up the data for him to see, but unexpectedly the ventilation duct opened. His eyes were cold as he said that the new virus was in the ventilation duct, and both of them were now infected and would die within 2 hours. Glotov tried to escape from the room, but the door had already been locked. He could only force the professor to produce the antidote. The professor was clearly prepared and said there was only 1 dose of the antidote locked in the safe downstairs. As long as Irina safely left the city, he would hand over the antidote. Seeing Glotov's uncertainty, the professor pulled up the data models of the virus and antidote on the computer. Glotov finally gave in, hurriedly dialed the phone of the guard downstairs, and asked him to arrange a car to escort Irina and others out of the city. The guard found it a bit strange, but still executed his boss's orders. Just as the vehicle was about to reach the checkpoint, the group of bandits who had once broken into the bunker suddenly intercepted the vehicle. They originally planned to break through the checkpoint, but didn't expect to encounter the old acquaintances from the bunker again. Moreover, they learned that this commuter car had been authorized and could freely leave the city. The bandit leader laughed and ordered his men to strip off the guard's uniform. Then they drove Irina and the others off the car. They planned to disguise themselves as guards and get past the checkpoint in Summit's car. However, the guards at the checkpoint received a temporary order from their superiors. As soon as they saw the commuter car with the bandits, they started indiscriminate shooting. The bandits unknowingly became scapegoats. It turned out that the executive director of Summit had issued an order to the captain of the guard to kill everyone in the commuter car. Glotov had no idea that he had been betrayed. His men reported that Irina's car had already left the city. When the professor wanted to confirm this by calling his daughter, Glotov explained that the signals outside the city had been blocked. Seeing that the professor wouldn't give him the antidote unless he made the call, Glotov grabbed Petya, threatening to take his life to pressure the professor. The professor reluctantly took out the antidote from the safe. At first, Glotov had some doubts and wanted the professor to try it first. Seeing the professor's unusually decisive demeanor, he snatched the antidote and injected it into his own body. The professor and his assistants looked on with pity. Glotov only felt a pain in his body and curled up. It turned out that what he had just injected was a dose of concentrated poison. There was no virus in the ventilation duct at all. It was all a fabrication by the professor, but Glotov had taken it for truth. Irina, who had escaped death, couldn't contact the professor via the radio and was worried that something might happen to her father. She decided to return to the lab. Scat speculated that the communication signal here had been blocked and told her not to worry too much. The other companions decided to accompany her to the lab, especially since they couldn't leave the city at this time. When they passed by the Summit headquarters, they found a large number of zombies lying outside. The bodies were likely the result of the side effects of the ultrasound. They didn't expect the zombies in the city to be cleaned up in this way. Just then, the professor's voice came over the radio. When Irina learned that her father was safe and that Glotov had died, she couldn't help but cry tears of joy. The other companions also breathed a sigh of relief. The city was finally clear and bright. What they didn't know was that inside a large mansion, the board members of Summit were gathered for a meeting. Although the army of zombies plan had failed, Glotov had found the perfect zombie warriors for the group, the pregnant virus-infected individuals. Now, they could resist the negative effects of the ultrasonic waves. The drama ended with a shot of the zombified Nadia. Undoubtedly, she was the perfect infected subject that the board members were talking about. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.